John here again. This message is another answer video for Scott, aka Make the World Greta Again. Scott, you asked, can you explain John 6:62 and John 17:5? And the answer is yes, of course I can. Now, I will say this: these are pre-existent verses. These are the proof text that people point to and say, "Look at this verse right here. See, this proves that Jesus pre-existed." And that's just not the case. For me, the thing that you need to do is first accept the fact that it's possible that you bought a lie. Now, I don't know what you believe. I don't know if you're Trinitarian, Unitarian, if you believe in a pre-existence or not. But assuming that you are a Trinitarian that believes in a pre-existent Christ, I would say that you first have to humble yourself and realize, okay, maybe, not that you bought a lie, but maybe you bought a lie. It is possible, right? You're human. So for me, I was born and raised in a Baptist church, and I was never Trinitarian. I always believed that the Father was God alone, right? And that Jesus was His Son. But I was more of a Sunday Christian, and it wasn't until I really got that burning desire to get on that straight and narrow path, and really I wanted God's truth. It was so important to me. And I was thinking one day about how, well, I know Jesus is not God, and Hebrews makes it clear that he was never an angel, so what did he pre-exist as? And so, I let Scripture tell me. And nowhere in Scripture does it ever talk about a pre-existence of Christ. Never. The apostles don't talk about it. Jesus doesn't talk about it. No one ever talks about it. There's actually a word in Greek, and oddly enough, it can be found in those early writings from these, Greeks that joined in Christianity. They used that word for, the Greek word for pre-existence all the time. But oddly enough, it's not in the Greek in Scripture. But anyway, it does talk about the beginning, the Genesis, the beginning of Christ, and it's in the womb of Mary. Even the angel Gabriel, who comes to Mary, he tells her there's going to be a miracle, and God's going to cause you to conceive. But nowhere does he say, and the word's going to come into your stomach. And he doesn't say any of that. So that's what I'm saying. You have to start off with please, understand that maybe you bought a lie. Maybe you don't have it all figured out. Okay, and maybe then that will open your heart to accept the truth. And it's not just Trinitarians. Unitarians also believe in this pre-existent. It's like I said, I did. But it wasn't until I really had a desire and a hunger to know God's truth and accept God's truth in spite of what I've been taught that I came to it. Now, if you look at Hebrews, this is chapter 1, verse 5. And I'm going to call out the Unitarians that are Jehovah's Witnesses out there. I consider you brothers and sisters. However, you got this wrong. And I don't think it's a salvation issue. That's why I don't really talk about it, because if it's not a salvation issue, I don't really like to, debate over it. But Hebrews 1:5, I don't know how Jehovah's Witnesses, why is this a stumbling block for you? God says, "For to which of the angels did he ever say, 'You are my son, today I have begotten you'?" That question is not like a wink, wink. Hey, which of the angels did he ever say this about? That's not what this means. The answer is none. There's not one angel that he's ever said, "You are my son, today I have begotten you." That's the point of Hebrews chapter 1, verse 5. It's talking about how Jesus is made a little lower for a short time, below the angels, and then he's above the angels. He's exalted above the angels. Why is that so hard to understand? This is not a wink, wink verse that's, I know the answer. It's the angel Gabriel. That's the one that, no, please stop it. Stop the nonsense. Because, it's important that we get Christ right, not because it's a salvation issue, but that's your Messiah. That's the one that sacrificed his life for you. At least, get to know him a little better. At least that's the way I see it. Now, let's go on to what your question's about. John chapter 6, verse 62. And it says, "What then if you see the Son of Man ascending to where he was before?" Now, again, I can understand how this can be a stumbling block for people. If you start off with a preconceived notion, well, he was in heaven before. So if he says, what do you say if I sin to where I was before? Well, naturally, he's talking about heaven. I get that. But again, understanding that nowhere in Scripture does it talk about a pre-existent Christ. Nowhere. Nowhere does it say anything other than his beginnings in the womb of Mary. Now you have to reconsider what you've been taught outside of Scripture, which is that he pre-existed. So let's also look at the context of what this is about. The context of what this is about is he's talking about his upcoming death. He's going to suffer and die. They don't realize it. The only one that knows this is Jesus. Everybody else is, hey, when are you going to come into your kingdom? We're ready. See, they thought this was going to be the victorious Messiah, and that Messiah is coming. But at that time, he was going to suffer and die first. And he knew it. They did not realize it. But he's talking about eating his flesh and drinking his blood. And it's just about partaking in that suffering that we must do in order to have salvation. That, we're going to partake in his death, burial, and resurrection, according to the Scripture, right? So, back it up just one verse, okay? It says, but Jesus, conscious that his disciples grumbled at this, said to them, does this cause you to stumble? What then if you see the Son of Man ascend to where he was before? Well, again, they're having a hard time with this, eating my flesh and drinking my blood. There's nothing to stumble about Jesus, ascending to heaven. That's a beautiful thing. But what Jesus is saying, you're getting caught up on these things that I'm talking about, eating my flesh and drinking my blood. Well, you stumble on that, what's going to happen when, someone who's dead comes back to life now? Because that can cause people to say, hey, what's going on? Right? And also, this is a beautiful thing I think about Scripture is the meaning of words. When you look at the Greek meaning of that word for ascending, it's the same exact word used as like a flower coming out of the ground, ascending out of the ground. Same word is used. And that's the same picture that is being painted. That's what, like I said, it's so beautiful. It's divinely inspired to use these exact words. And that's the picture that is going to happen. See? That Jesus is going to, he's going to die. They don't know it, but he's going to die and he's going to ascend to where he was before, back to life. So, again, this is the meaning of John 6:62. It's not talking about a pre-existent Christ. And if you're going to make a case for pre-existent Christ, then you got to show me more than just a verse in isolation, which is talking about his death, burial, and resurrection, which is clearly what this is referring to. And in fact, in other times you see where they don't understand it. He's like, where I'm going, you can't come, but believe me, you'll follow, but now's not your time. And again, it was talking about his suffering and his sacrifice. They also suffered and sacrificed. They were put to death for spreading the truth. So they did follow. And it has nothing to do with an ascension to heaven at all. Let's go on to your second thing now, is John chapter 17, verse 5. And we see here it says, now, Father, glorify me together with yourself with the glory which I had with you before the world was. Well, again, start off with this notion that Jesus pre-existed as God, and you end up with this, well, there you are, that Jesus already had this glory, and now he's asking for it back. But does he say that? No, he does not. Nowhere in here does it say back. Reread it. He's asking for the glory. Now he's asking for. In fact, let's go back another verse. One more verse. It says, I glorified you on the earth. This is Jesus talking to God. I glorified you on the earth, having accomplished the work which you have given me to do. Now, Father, glorify me with yourself with the glory which I had with you before the world was. Do you see how that's different? The time that he's going to receive that glory is now. He knows that it was already existed with God, and he had it with God, just like my son had glory with me before he ever was. But the glory existed with me, not that he physically had it himself. And that's what you got to understand about this verse is, A, he does not ask for it back. Nowhere in Scripture does he ever ask for it back. And nowhere in Scripture does he ever, going back to what we were just talking about, say he's going back to heaven. Never does he ever say that. So when we look at this verse, okay, and we realize that this is a long conversation. Look at it. This whole thing that I'm scrolling is a conversation that Jesus is having with God. And what he's saying to God is, God, I've done this and I've done this and, I finished the work and give me the glory, because again, he knew that he was going to receive this glory. Scripture makes it clear. And again, he had this unique relationship with God, that God spoke to him, and he knew that this glory was there for him, again, in store, but it existed with God. God lives outside of time. There is no such thing as time with God. So you have God, it's with God that Jesus had the glory. And just so you understand, look at chapter 17, verse 22. The glory which you have given me, I have given to them. Well, who's the them there? Well, not only is it talking about the apostles, and it makes it clear here if you read it, he says he's referring to us as well. It's to all the saints, even the ones that the word comes from the apostles when they put out the word of truth. So right here, Jesus is saying he gave us glory. Well, we didn't even exist at this time, and yet Scripture says we were given glory then. So if I were to see Jesus, I could say, all right, now Jesus, I fulfilled what you wanted me to do. I spread the gospel. Now, glorify me, give me the glory that I had with you, before, before I existed. And it's perfectly fine. According to Scripture, I already have this glory. I haven't received it yet, but I already have it. It's been given to me. And as another example, okay, because again, I understand it's hard to accept that you bought a lie. You're pushing back and say, well, that don't really make sense. But clearly it's saying that we've already been given glory, and yet we didn't exist yet. If we go to 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 20, it says, for he was foreknown before the foundation of the world. This is talking about Jesus. He was foreknown by God. It doesn't say God knew him. It said he was foreknown. That means before his existence, he was known by God. Same way with Jeremiah. I believe it's chapter 1, where God tells Jeremiah that I knew you before you were born. That doesn't mean Jeremiah pre-existed, did it? No. And again, this proves that Jesus didn't pre-exist, because he was only foreknown by God before the foundation of the world. Before God created the world, he foreknew. That means to know before this person exists. He foreknew Christ. So it's not just something I'm saying, trying to twist Scripture or anything like that. This is just facts. This is what Scripture has to say, and not what I have to say at all. And like I said, I understand it's tough, because we have to humble ourselves and admit that we bought a lie. But I'm telling you, to accept God's truth and to let Scripture interpret Scripture and not some man, whether it's a priest, a preacher, whoever it is. That's why it's dangerous to go to these churches that aren't teaching truth. That's why we're warned about doing that. It's because it's easy to bend Scripture, especially when you put verses in isolation like that. But like I said, that's my explanation on both those verses. If you disagree with me, that's fine. Just please be specific and tell me exactly what you disagree with. And if you're gonna say that Christ pre-existed, you're gonna have to make a better case than just these two verses. And also, I want you to understand this. Trinitarians need to have Christ pre-exist. They need it. If Christ does not pre-exist, then their triune God is dead. Because if he didn't pre-exist, that's it. Then, if he didn't pre-exist, there's no triune God. There's only God the Father. So they have to, with every fiber in their being, find these little verses and say, yeah, see, he pre-existed. Kind of like when Jesus says that, about coming from heaven, right? The thing about that is, all good things are said to come to heaven. I believe that's in the book of James, I believe. All good things are said to come from heaven. Not literally coming from heaven, but we understand what that means. So Jesus is good, and therefore, yes, he could be said in that Hebraic mind to come from heaven. Let's not forget he was Jewish, right? So he had certain Jewish idioms that he would say. And it was clearly understood. It's only this Gentile mindset. See, this is the thing that really gets me, is if you study this stuff, this is what you'll find, okay? In the early Christianity, it was predominantly Jewish men that were Christians. And it wasn't until later on, okay, the Gentiles were added into it, and the word spread to the Gentiles. And now the Gentiles became Christians, and they were the majority, not the Jewish people that were converting, but also that it was these Gentiles. And the thing about that is that many of them were anti-Semitic. Read the writings and you'll find this out. But they kind of pushed out those Jewish ways of thinking. But we shouldn't. Our Messiah was a Jewish man. So the point is, though, is that the Greeks, especially, right, when they came in there, they brought their beliefs. See, in the Jewish mind, there's no such thing as pre-existence except for those things existing with God, see? But not literal pre-existence. However, the Greeks, when they came in, they did believe in pre-existence. They did have God-men. And guess what? That's what you hear all the time. Not in Scripture, but all the time you hear Jesus called a God-man, a God-man, a God-man. And why are you not asking yourself, well, why did this come into play? Because you didn't see it prior to the Greeks overtaking Christianity. But once they did, now they brought their culture and their belief system into it. What appealed to them, which was God-men and pre-existent beings. Again, this is something you don't have to take my word for it. You can study it as history. You can read it for yourself and really kind of solidify. I'd say you don't need that, because Scripture alone will prove that he didn't pre-exist, that God is the Father alone, that Jesus is not God. Scripture will tell you that. But if you really want to rely on outside sources, just study the men that brought these lies into it, and you will find the truth just by doing that. And asking yourself questions such as, why? Why is it that, once the Greeks came in, why is it that certain manuscripts that came out of that area are the ones that are corrupted to make it look like God is triune, that are added onto? There are variations in the manuscripts, but there's different areas in which these manuscripts come from. And oddly enough, like I said, where these areas are, that these manuscripts are kind of added on and saying things that it shouldn't say to make it seem like Jesus is God or God is triune. Why? It's like I said, it's not hard. If you really love God and you care about God's truth, you can find all this stuff for yourself. But my point is this. I want to help you, but it's only going to come if you're willing to accept the fact first that maybe you bought a lie. And if so, it can open your heart. And if you love God's truth, then you will see that I'm 100% right. So we can have a dialogue. Leave any more questions that you have for me. Anything that you disagree with what I said, please tell me. Be specific, though, so I know exactly what it is you're disagreeing with. And until next time, I'll be praying for you.